That's damn fine coffee. It's time for us to do our post-film club discussion, our catch-up after you sat down and watched Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Now, I said in my introduction that the film had been very, very badly received by some critics, and I think it's a misunderstood masterpiece. I said it was one of the greatest horror films of the decade and, crucially, needed to be seen in isolation. And I asked you to watch it with an open mind and to see whether or not you agreed with me that it was one of those films that had been completely missed by the critics at the time. Now, loads of responses, and interestingly, they are pretty much split down the middle between people who loved the film and people who hated the film. Very few responses from people who thought it was, okay. In the sake of balance, let's start with some of you who disagreed with my assessment that it's a misunderstood masterpiece. This from Space Odds. Fire Walk with Me is an absolute mess of a film. The film's pacing is all over the place, and Lynch's trademark surrealism is not wonderfully ridiculous, but hilariously bad. Also, the film lacked suspense, a strong factor in other Lynch films. This, pretty much an agreement from Alexander Fanner. Let me begin by saying I've never seen the TV series, which I said you should kind of leave that to one side, judge the film as a film. But, in caps, but since the movie is supposed to work on its own, here's my opinion, I found it boring. I was so bored that in the end I couldn't even tell you if the performances were good or not. Yes, we understand what happens to the main character, but so what? The characters aren't likeable. It's not an interesting story at all, and the so-called terror is mildly disturbing at best, if by then you're not sleeping. Perhaps it's a symptom or effect of boredom. Here's another non-too-positive response. This from Lord Tangent. I watched 40 minutes of this before I realised I just didn't care. Maybe all the great plot, character and horror bits came later on. And somebody else who had a hard time at the beginning is Greg Carr. Starts out by saying, I really like some of David Lynch's films, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, The Elephant Man, and I absolutely love Lost Highway, which many critics have a hard time with. But I've not seen Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me until now, and I had to start watching this film 3 times. The first 2 times, I just couldn't sit through the beginning, which I thought was horribly written and acted even worse. Now, that sounds like a wholly negative response, but further on in this, frankly, rather long post, starts talking about that fantastic scene when Laura Palmer is talking about falling through space. Would you get faster and faster and then burst into flames? And suddenly we get, it made me feel something. I can't really explain, but it's a kind of sadness that makes me happy. And in certain sections, it's as scary as the best horror films I've ever seen. And that includes Takashi Miike's Audition. I dreaded watching this film because I thought I would hate it and it would be a waste of time. But it was a film that actually inspired me. It's not perfect, but it will definitely stir up some emotions inside of you. So, some wholly negative, some starting negative and tending toward the positive, and some majorly thumbs up. How about this for a ringing endorsement? This from Witchfinder. Love this film. Absolutely love it. Bob's own appearance is a brief but indelible mind fright that plays on its own irrationality. I agree, that scene really creeps me out. What's scary about a denim-clad man with long hair? In the hands of Lynch, it's terrifying. And the scene in the bar is stunning with its maddeningly muffled voices. Incidentally, some prints of Fire Walk with Me have subtitles for that scene, others don't. When I first saw it in America, no subtitles. Then saw it again in the UK, there were subtitles. Apparently Lynch wavered, wasn't quite sure whether you wanted to be able to understand it or not. Personally, I prefer it when you can't quite figure out what they're saying. It's cinematically inventive and acts as a masterclass on how to maintain directorial tone. And that's not the only ringing endorsement. How about this from Christopher Lloyd? As a grown man of 36, the only things that scare me are the thoughts of illness and trauma to my loved ones, and David Lynch's long brooding shots taking place in corridors with doors at the end, or corners in general. I know there's not going to be a boo scare at the end, a la many straight-to-video horrors, but the knowledge that there will be anything behind the door just lurking menacingly is enough to scare the bejesus out of me every time. The dream scene within the painting is a classic example. Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, muddled, overlong, terrifying, confusing, cheesy in places, but terribly worthwhile. Here's another one from CRM114. I just finished watching this film and I felt I had to comment. It's simply one of the best pieces of atmospheric cinema I've seen outside of Tarkovsky. For those of you complaining about the lack of plot, I hate to sound patronising, but you're simply missing the point. The film works because of the atmosphere of sheer menace it creates through the sound and visuals. The soundtrack in particular rivals Eraserhead for its complexity in terms of how it complements the drama. I really do agree about the soundtrack. recently had a film festival in which we screened Eraserhead, and Alan Splett's extraordinary soundscape for that film is so important. And David Lynch is one of those directors who thinks from the soundtrack up. I'll leave you with this final short but pithy comment from Pinky Green. I'd love to comment, but I'm as blank as a fart. So there's just a flavour of the amazingly diverse responses to Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Some of you hate it, some of you agree with me that it's a masterpiece, but that's kind of the point of the film club. I'm really enthusiastic about this. I hope you are too, and I hope you'll be equally enthusiastic about the announcement of our next title. As before, I will record an introduction, it'll go up on Vimeo. Hopefully you can download it and watch it before you watch the film. I'm going to give you a few weeks to track down a copy of the film. Our next screening is Slade in Flame, perhaps the greatest overlooked British rock movie of all time.